Hello everyone, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink, and I have a very long video for you guys showing how I made these really fun shaker cards using the My Favorite Things Birdie Brown Space Explorer stamp set. So I am starting off with some Nina Solar White 80-pound cardstock, and I trimmed it down, and I have all of the coordinating dies for this set. They're still connected. I've done a quick tip video on this showing how I lay the dies face down onto the cardstock, and then I line up all of the images in the set with those dies using my MFT. And then I can close the lid of my MFT. It picks up all the stamps at once. And then this way I can ink up my stamps. And today I'm inking them up with My Favorite Things Black Licorice Hybrid ink, which is a Copic friendly ink. And then stamping it onto this paper with that. And if I wanted to, I could keep stamping and do several sheets of this. You know, you can mass produce and at the very least have extra images stamped so you can practice and color and all that stuff, which I actually ended up doing. I'd stamped some before I started filming and ended up making a mess of them, but I kept one image and I'll get to that in a minute. But after I was done stamping, I pull the cardstock out of my MFT, and then I'm just using my Copic markers to color these guys in. And for, I don't even know how long now, I've been going darkest to lightest because honestly, it's a convenience factor for me. It goes faster, everything blends faster, and then I'm not going back and forth because I don't have near as much time as I used to color images. So I'm only showing this one little Space Explorer here. All the other images I used, the little Space Explorers, I used the exact same colors, didn't change anything. And then all the other, like the little planets and that, I just used variations of the same Copic markers. And I will have a picture on my blog. I did write down all the colors I used and what I used them for. So I did that and took a picture of it. And I will have that on my blog post if anyone wants to reference that. But I super sped this up. This is about 4 times faster than it took me to color. But I did his skin tone first in his hair because that's just force of habit with me. I always start with the skin, and then I did the hair. And then for his little spacesuit, I did BV23. It's just a really grayed purple. And then I blended that out with a little bit of C0, so very pale gray, and then a little bit of the color of Splendor. Super simple because, you know, most spacesuits are technically white, but you could do whatever you want. So I did all that, and then for the balloons, I'm using some purples. And when you're blending some colors together, if 2 colors are kind of further apart and you're having a hard time blend, you can touch the lighter tip of the marker you're using to the darker tip of the other marker and just pick up a little bit of that color, and it helps them blend. And with Copics, after you've done that, you can scribble it off on some scrap paper. On here, I didn't even bother because they're just fine. But if you're really, especially if they're very different colors, you definitely want to just scribble it off so you don't end up contaminating the tips of your markers. But it's not something I do very often, but certain colors like these purples are a little harder to blend. So I did that, and I just had an idea in the back of my mind as I was coloring these. I kind of wanted to do, you know, purples and aquas and yellows because that's what I'm going to use for my background. And then once I was done coloring these, I coated the balloons and parts of the little spacesuit with my Spectrum Noir Clear Shimmer pen. So everything's nice and sparkly. And I did the same thing with the other images and the planets and all of that. So once everything was colored, I can now line up my dies and I tape them into place before I run them through my machine. So I have everything die cut. And you can see here I've got a few extra images. I have an extra little spaceman and a few extra planets. And those were from the other piece of cardstock that I just messed up on. But I saved a couple of the images and finished coloring them because I was like, you know what, I might as well make 2 cards. My original goal was to only make 1. But then I was like, you know what, I kind of want to make 2 because I had ideas for 2 different cards. So I've got a couple pieces. This is Bristol smooth cardstock this time. You could still use Nina Solar White. It's a great cardstock for blending, but the Bristol smooth just makes life a little bit easier when you want to blend colors. But again, as I was doing this, I was like, honestly, I don't think it even really matters what cardstock you use because you can see as I'm doing this, I'm not really blending colors. I've got my distress inks out here. I've super sped this up as well just because it takes a while. But I applied all these lighter colors first, and then I'm going around all of it with the black soot distress ink to create my galaxy backgrounds. And you can, like, this looks like a hot mess. It looks awful. It really does. Bear with me. You always have to have patience with galaxy backgrounds. I will also admit this is the first time I've ever done this. I've seen other people's and they're absolutely fabulous and beautiful. And part of me, 1, doesn't have the patience, and 2, I was experimenting here. So it's like I'm applying all this color, and I kept telling myself, I'm like, it's going to look better once you have the splatter. Like, don't knock it until it's completely done, even though it does look it just looks awful right now. So I did all my blending. Then I spritzed it with my distress sprayer. So I've got some splatter and it's starting to come together a little bit. And then I had spritzed it a second time, let it sit for a little bit, picked it up with my paper towel. So there's even some more like splatter and it's like, okay, this is working. And then I got out my Copic Opaque White, which is just a super opaque white paint. I love this stuff. Mine is actually getting like starting to dry out a bit because I've had it for so long. But you can use regular like craft acrylic paint. You can use some gesso if you are gouache, that sort of a thing. I really like this stuff because it is so highly pigmented. I can thin it out with water and it stays white, like white. So I love my Copic Opaque White. So I mix that onto an acrylic block, a fair bit of it, with some water. And then I start by splattering with a paintbrush. I got out my splatter cover here. And then I use that toothbrush I was using earlier and I'm just running my thumb across it to create a really fine like mist-like splatter. That's what makes this the Galaxy. That's what totally finishes this off. And you don't notice the absolute mess I'd made when I was blending. Like it looks like a completely different piece. So I did that with both pieces. Splattered first with the paintbrush to get larger, like little blobs and splatters to create kind of planets and that sort of a thing. And then I grabbed my toothbrush and splattered that by running my thumbnail against it. So I've got this really fine splatter. So you definitely want to protect your work surface with this. It gets everywhere. Had it all over my hands. I had ink all over me, but I just went and washed my hands afterwards. I let everything completely dry. And then I ran these through my die cut machine with the single stitch line rounded rectangle frame Dynamics. Say that 3 times fast. And this is where I made things really complicated. I wanted to pop these up because obviously I'm making shaker cards, but I didn't want to use foam tape because I didn't want white showing because I'm doing this Galaxy background. There's a lot of black, etc. So I was like, you know what? I can die cut a whole bunch of black cardstock with this and just stack it that way. It just means I have to do a lot more than your standard like 2 rows of foam tape. So I did the black cardstock and I was okay with that. And all the like excess like interior pieces I just save in my scrap drawer because I use black cardstock all the time. And the only thing with that is it's time consuming because you have to adhere every single layer. And you can see my first layer, I inlaid the background, the interior piece inside one of the pieces of the black cardstock frame. And then while I was doing this, I was like, you know what? I've never had luck with the craft foam, but I've got some black craft foam. Let's see if this is going to work. So I did die cut some black craft foam. I've mentioned in previous videos, I hate craft foam and die cutting. I never get good results. I've actually broken a die cut machine doing the whole craft foam thing. But I was like, you know what? I'm going to try it. I'm going to die cut just the craft foam. I didn't add cardstock to it and I only ran it through once because the thing with craft foam and die cutting it is it squishes it and it extends it. And you can actually see here, that's exactly what it did with this. The frames were not the same size as the cardstock ones. You can see there's like that gap. So I still had to cut the craft foam, fiddle with it, adhere it down. It was a pain in the butt, honestly, for those that can do it and especially can like cut craft foam and cardstock at the same time. If you have the cardstock adhered to the craft foam and you die cut it, that keeps the craft foam usually from like pressing out the sides and all that sort of thing. I have no luck. I cannot get it to do that. And if I've said it in so many videos, I just can't. So if I was to ever do cards like this again, I would either stack all black cardstock pieces, which would be time consuming, yes, or I would still use foam tape again and just run a either permanent marker or a Sharpie, black Sharpie marker all along the edges before adhering it. So that would cover up the white. Of course, I thought of that after I played around with this. I don't even want to know how long it took me to get these figured out. So now you know. So I had my stack here. I did a black cardstock frame and then I added 1 layer of craft foam. And I'm just using a really fine, this is like a 1/8 of an inch adhesive here that I'd use to adhere everything. And then I'm starting to adhere my little elements, my little planets here. Some of them I trimmed off the edges so I could stick them against the sides. And then for my little character, I got out this nylon thread. I've done another video showing this, which I'll have linked at the end of this one. It was a trick I picked up from Jennifer McGuire that I just thought was absolutely brilliant. So I've done, 1 card with it. And I've been as soon as I was looking at these images, I'm like, I got to do this again because it's perfect with these images. So it's very hard to see on video, but this thread, and even in real life, it's actually really hard to see this thread. It's almost completely invisible. So I've got a long piece of it and I'm taping it to the back of this image with just standard Scotch tape. So I've got the thread on the top and the bottom and you can see like the image is suspended with this thread. This works great for spinner cards too, just FYI. So I've got my thread, and I'm going to peel off the backing of the tape on the top and the bottom of the frame here so that I can press the thread into it. So the bottom thread, I'm just pressing into place. It's more to hold this image. And then the top thread, I'm going to loosen just a little bit before I press it into place. That way my image is suspended, and yet it can still shake back and forth, and yet it's not going to fall to the top or the bottom. So my kind of scene stays intact, and yet the image can move. That's what I love about this. It just gives it that extra something. So I sandwiched that thread with another piece of adhesive on the top and the bottom there, so it's really well secured. And I'm going to peel off the backing of the rest of the adhesive, and I'm going to add another layer of this black craft foam. And I had to do the exact same thing again. I had to trim it down because it was too big for the actual frame, because it just had been pressed out of proportion even running it through that one time. But again, if I was using cardstock, I would have done, 3 or 4 frames of the cardstock, adhered my thread for my image, and then added another probably 3 or 4. It depends on how thick you want your shaker to be, what all you're adding. I wanted this to be thick because I'm planning on adding a fair bit, which again, you'll see. So, and if you're doing foam tape, I would do 1 layer of foam tape and then add my image with the thread and then a second layer of foam tape. So I've got my frames, and I trimmed off the thread that was hanging on to the outside. And now I'm going to set that aside. And I'm going to go on, and you can see it's like starting to come together here. It's just like, oh yes. Oh yes. So I'm going to set that aside. And for the second card, this is why I wanted to show this, because I did something just slightly different. I wanted to connect my little space guy to the spaceship. So I grabbed some white cord. This is actually just some white hemp. And I'm taping the piece. I start by taping it to the back of the spaceship first with that same just Scotch tape. And then I'm going to use that same double-sided, really strong adhesive. And I just apply that over first. I didn't peel off the backing though, because this tape took a little bit. I'm like, I don't want the hemp cord to be too long. I don't want it to be too short. So I kind of had to fiddle a little bit because it was kind of fighting me here. But I wanted my spaceman to be connected to his spaceship. So I kind of figured out how much space I needed. And then same thing, I'm going to tape that to the back of my little spaceman, and I'm going to trim off the excess. And then I'm going to grab that clear nylon thread again and attach it just to the spaceman, not to the ship. So I just cut a long length of it, and then I'm going to hold it into place and do the same thing. Tape it to the back on the top and the bottom with just some Scotch tape. And then once I've got that done, I'm going to peel off the backing on the ship here, and I'm going to adhere that into place in the lower corner of my scene. So I've got that adhered into place, and now I can like suspend this little spaceman within the frame. So this one, because it's being kind of pulled by that cord that's attached to the ship, I have to attach the thread in kind of random areas to get it where I want it. But that's the nice thing about it, is I can kind of fiddle here and shake it around and see where I want them to go, because I still want them to move. So the threads end up getting attached kind of in funny places, but then it's perfect. He's still attached to the ship, but yet he can still shake. This was just, I was having so much fun making these. They did take a really long time, but it's always after it's all done, it's like, oh, I could have done this so much faster after figuring it all out. So after I've got everything adhered, I'm going to do some more trimming of these other images, which, by the way, I also coated with that Spectrum Noir clear sparkle pen, but you can't really see it in the video or even in the finished pictures, but they've just got that fun sparkle added to them. So I'm adhering all of those into place on my background with some Tombow Mono multi-adhesive, and just being careful not to add too much adhesive. You don't want this stuff oozing out because it stays sticky. Like, it basically stays tacky after it dries. So you definitely don't want that in a shaker card. So I'm just really light with that adhesive. Got everything adhered, and now I can peel off the backing to all of these frame pieces, and then do the exact same thing. Add that second layer of craft tape or craft foam, etc. So once I've got everything adhered, I can trim off again all that excess thread on the top and bottom, which you can't even see. So get everything trimmed down. And then to create my windows, since I used curved rectangles, I can't just trim it down with a paper trimmer. So I just took that same die, that single stitch line rounded rectangle frames, set it on top of a full sheet of transparency here. And I always link to, it's a box of them that I got on Amazon years ago. It was a box of, I think, 100 transparencies. I've literally had these for years. If you want to make a ton of shaker cards, you will probably never have to buy another pack of this again. I haven't needed to. I don't even think I've gone halfway through it. And I'm not even kidding. I think I've had the box for 6 or 7 years now. So I just laid that down, traced around the edge of the frame with a Sharpie marker. And then I'm cutting on the inside, like as well inside of that, because I want this to be able to adhere to this frame without sticking off the edges. So I've already got that double-sided adhesive on the back of the frame. And then I can press down my transparency, and then whatever little bits here and there that are still hanging over, because, you know, I didn't trim it down very well at all, I can just quickly trim with my scissors. So I'm going to trim that down. So now I've got my window with that galaxy frame that I had cut earlier when I die cut everything. So that was my original intention. Again, you could make this so much simpler. Just, you know, make a black cardstock frame, have your background, etc. But I just wanted that more seamless look with the galaxy background and the frame. So I've got both my frames coated with the transparent, adhered to the transparency to create windows. And then to create the actual shaker elements, I have these 2 packages of Martha Stewart. I have some micro beads and I have some iridescent hearts and stars glitter. So I sprinkled in some clear micro beads and then some aqua ones and a little bit of gold and a little bit of purple here, just to kind of go with the colors I did in the background. So I sprinkled a fair amount in of these micro beads. And then I added some of the iridescent stars in like a yellow and a clear. Not too much, but just a bit. And then as a final bit of like shaker goodness, and because I'm obsessed with them, I've used them in how many videos lately, I'm going to add some Studio Katcha Crystal Clear Fusion sequins, just for some bigger shaker elements, and because I just love them, and they kind of have that blue tone to them that it's so pretty. So I sprinkled a few of those in too, just for good measure. And then, yeah, you can see everything's going to like shake around. The micro beads is what really gives it that shaker sound, which you guys are going to hear in a minute. And once I've got everything in here and I'm happy with it, I'm going to peel off the backing of the tape again, and then I'm going to adhere my frames. And this is where everything really starts to come together, and you see the seamless, like the background continue onto the frames here. So I'm going to make sure I've got this pressed down completely to these frames, and then that creates my fun little shaker. So I do that twice. So I've got both of everything sandwiched in the center of these. Super fun. Super fun. It was just, you can't help but grin looking at these adorable little images and all the little fun little elements. So get everything adhered. And then I'm going to go on to create my actual card bases. So you can see everything's like all shaky and fun. So much fun. So much fun. So for my card bases, I hummed and hawed for a bit. I dithered between, I could have done white card bases, you know, my go-to. I thought about doing black card bases or like an aqua blue. I decided to go with black. In the end, it actually doesn't matter. But I went with black because the edges, all that black foam and cardstock and everything blended in better than doing white. That was another reason. So I cut a piece of black cardstock in half, and then I'm scoring it again in half. So I've got 2 top folding A2 size cards, so 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. And then I use that same frame die and die cut some MFT blue raspberry cardstock, and I'm using the interior of those, not the frame. And I'm going to stamp sentiments from that same Space Explorer stamp set. I'm using that same Black Licorice Hybrid ink because I didn't add sentiments to the outside of the card. I decided to keep them as is because of just everything going on. I was like, you know what? I can just put the sentiments on the inside. So one is a birthday card, and then one is just a kind of a just because card. And then I decided while I was at it to sponge some of that black soot distress ink along the edges just because I could. And then I adhered the extra little spacemen that I had stamped and colored earlier, and the remaining couple little stars from the set. So I adhered all of that to these interior pieces. I had thought, since I was doing black card bases, to just stamp and emboss the sentiments in white, which you totally could, and then adhere the characters, and that'd be great. And then you would just write to your recipient with a gel pen, which would look fabulous. But this is another way to kind of get around that, because people used to always ask me that, like, what do you do if the cardstock is really dark, like you can't read a ballpoint pen? You just write it in gel pen and it looks fabulous. But this is a way to get around. You just die cut a piece or trim down a piece of lighter colored cardstock and adhere it to the inside, and you're good to go. So I was almost done here. I was adhering my shaker pieces to the card bases, and I was going to leave them at this. After I was done filming and I was cleaning up my desk, I still had the pieces left over from die cutting, like the outer edges of these galaxy pieces, and I couldn't for the life of me throw them away because I was like, they're so pretty. I put so much work into them, the sponging, the splattering, and everything else. I was like, you know what? They would look great if I just adhered them. So I made sure they would, like, this would actually work. And they did, because they were thin enough, I was able to kind of get them around those frames. So I'm just using some multimedia matte adhesive for this, just in case anything oozes out. And because it had that fine tip applicator, I could go all around this fine little edge of the card front. And I'm just applying all this multimedia matte adhesive to the card itself. And then I'm going around and I'm able to press that remaining piece of the frame, and that creates kind of my more seamless scene. And that's what I meant by, when I did this, it made the card base itself irrelevant. I could have done white or any color because it doesn't matter. After I adhere this, you can't even see it, but it still works. So that finished off these cards. This was the longest video I've done in a long time. I hope you guys enjoyed this. This was really fun to make. And yeah, they're all shaky and fun, and the little images move thanks to that nylon thread. So as always, I will have links below the video to my blog post, picture of all the Copic colors used. I will have links to all the supplies. It'll be in the description box below, as well as over on my blog, which is always linked directly below my videos. I put a direct link to my blog post, so you guys can check that out if you're interested in finding any of the supplies I used, etc. Thank you all so much for watching, subscribing, thumbs upping, and commenting on my videos. I really appreciate it, and I will see you all very soon in the next one. Bye.